Hi, Steve D'Agostino here. In this video, we're going to go over the basics of MicroPython, at least some of them. But before we do that, I want to go over Thonny a little bit. So, when learning how to program your Raspberry Pi Pico, you need to learn basic concepts of a limited version of the Python programming language known as MicroPython. It's a great way to learn Python. It's much simpler than Python, which can be very complicated and take a long time to master. But for the purposes of using a microcontroller, you only need to know some basics to get started. Okay. So before we jump in, let's take a minute just to familiarize you with Thonny, the Python IDE that we're going to be using with the Pico. Okay. So to get started, there are three parts of the interface you need to be aware of. There's the toolbar, there's the editor, and there's the shell. Okay, the toolbar has icons that'll help you do a few things like creating new files, opening existing ones, saving your files, running your scripts. You have some debugging options up here, but that's really more for Python than MicroPython, but they are there. And then stopping any scripts that might just kind of run on forever, and I'll get into those kinds of things in the next tutorial. Okay. Now, if you're on a Mac, things will look a little bit different. This looks like a sheet of paper. This looks like a folder. This looks like a blue 3.5-inch floppy disk from way back in the day when I was a kid. And this icon looks the same. You might see a little bug here. And this looks like a stop sign. Okay, but they all do the same things. The editor here is where you'll write programs that you'll save and run by using the Run button in the toolbar. Now, you might also see or hear this referred to as the script area because this is where you write your scripts. This is the Python shell. Now, the Python shell has two purposes. You can run individual instructions by hitting the Enter key without having to write them in the editor and run them, but this is only really good for simple instructions like one-liners. Okay, so you won't use it to write complex code. The second purpose is to provide information about scripts that you've written, including where errors might be in your code. Okay, sometimes you'll hear this referred to as REPL, which stands for read, evaluate, print, and loop. Okay, so that's your interface. And so now that you know those parts of it, let's try a little code to get started. So first we'll begin with the universal first program, hello world. Okay, first we're going to try it in the shell because what we're going to do is only a one-line command. So the way that you're going to write this in Python is we're gonna say print here, open parentheses, and because we're going to be writing text, we need to use quotation marks. Okay, so we'll just write hello world, close those quotes, close your parentheses, and hit enter. Boom, says hello world. Okay, so now that you've kind of seen how you can do that in the shell, let's try it up here in the editor. So if you want to clear anything out that you've done in the shell, because sometimes it gets a little messy down here and you don't want to look at a bunch of codes and errors and messages and things down here. And that's fine. Personally, I like to keep my shell clean and clear when I'm doing something new. So here right now I'm on a PC. So I'm going to hit Control L, and if you're on a Mac, you'll hit Command K. All right. So now that we've done that, let's try doing the same thing up here in the code editor. Okay. So first thing, well, let's go on ahead and write the same thing. Write print hello world, exclamation point, and close your quotes and parentheses. Now what we're going to do is we're going to save. You'll be prompted where to save it on your Pico. Now I've already created this file before. We'll just call it hello world.py. don't forget to add the .py to the end, because that's the file extension that denotes a Python file. And we'll do that with every file that we create in Thonny. Okay, so let's go on ahead and save that. I've already saved it, so I'm going to overwrite. Cool. All right, now let's click the run button. Boom. Hello world. Just like you saw it do before. Okay? Now there are two things going on here. First, you're telling Thonny to print something out in the shell. And second, by using quotation marks, you're telling Thonny that what is to be printed is a string of text. In programming languages like Python, there are what are known as primitives, which are basic data types to work with in your programming. Those data types are strings, which is just plain old text, integers, which are whole numbers, floats, which are numbers with decimals, and booleans, which are like binary choices, like true or false or 1 and 0. Okay? All right, now that we've covered that, we're going to write your first loop, which is just a term that refers to a set of instructions to be repeated. Okay, you'll be writing those instructions in a specific type of way. Now, the reason for this is that Python programs run from top to bottom, but your interpreter is dumb. Okay, it only knows what you tell it. So the way we give instructions to Python interpreter is by grouping those instructions with indentations. Well, what we're going to do is tell Thonny to print some text, run a loop, then print more text. When we give those instructions that are to be repeated by the loop, we'll indent those instructions so that Thonny will kind of understand. All right, so there are two primary loop types, but today, or in this tutorial, we're only going to focus on what is called a for loop, which runs a defined number of times. Okay, so first, let's start a new program by clicking the new file icon. Okay. And then writing some code in the editor like so. We'll do print loop starting. All right, so you know what that does already. Now we're going to open up our loop code. So we're going to say for I in range 10 colon. Okay? All right, and then we're going to hit enter. I want you to notice something here. All right, so what you're doing here is assigning a variable I for the loop to use as a counter and telling it that I will be every number in the range of 10 as the loop is performed. In other words, the instructions will be repeated 10 times as defined by the range. Now, Python's known as a zero-index language, which means the default start of the range is 0, not 1. So 10 is not included in the range. So anytime you put a number up here, your range will be exclusive of that number. Okay. What that means is the numbers that are going to print will be, or that are going to be used, will be the range of 0 through 9. So I will be the numbers 0 through 9 in this example. Okay. The other thing to notice here is the colon at the end of the line. Now that tells Thonny that you're about to give it instructions for the loop you just told it will be performed. When you hit the enter or return key, depending on whether it's a Mac or PC, it will also automatically start at an indented 4 spaces in. So you see it's already indented here. So you put the colon here, you're saying I'm about to start a loop, you hit enter, and Thonny says, okay, well, we're going to go on ahead and indent for you and write everything within the loop until you're done with your loop. Okay? So this is where you're going to tell Thonny what instructions to repeat. So for the sake of this exercise, we're just going to print to the shell. But this time, we're going to print both a string of text and whatever number I happens to be for each repetition of the loop. So to do that, we're going to do print again, and we're going to say loop number. That's the whole string that we're going to write, because we are adding to what we call arguments. These are two different things that are going to be printed. Okay, and in this case, we're going to append this print with whatever I is. Okay, now since that's not a string, we're not going to put it in quotes. Okay, so we hit enter. It's waiting for the next line of the next instructions for the loop, but we're not going to do anything else with the loop. What we're going to do is at the end of the loop, we'll hit the backspace key, and we'll say, okay, well, once this loop is finished, we're going to print loop ended. Okay. We're going to save this to the Pico. We're going to call it indentation.py. And we're going to hit, well, here, I like to clear out my shell, so Control L or Command K if you're on a Mac. And we're going to hit the run button. Notice it repeated those instructions. First it said loop starting, just like we told it to print. It repeated those numbers 0 through 9. It finished the loop and it printed loop ended. Okay. All right. I think that's probably enough for today. Let's try something a little bit different here within the for loop. Let's call it give it a different range of, let's say you wanted to do 1 through 10 instead of 0 through 9. Well, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to, instead of starting with an index of 0, we have to tell it to start at the index of 1. And remember that the last number is never included. So we don't want to say 1 to 10 because it'll just do 1 to 9. So we have to say 1 to 11. Okay. Let's clear that out. We'll save. We'll click run. And notice it went 1 to 10. And we can make these numbers anything you want. Let's say we're going to print the numbers 3 through 16. Or I'm sorry, through 15, of course, because it's exclusive. But you can see, so just play around with that a little bit, just so that you can get used to the idea of writing these for loops, okay? Because we'll use these later when we start programming your Pico and start making cool stuff happen, okay? Next time we'll try a different kind of loop and explore what are known as conditionals that perform actions based on whether certain criteria are met. All right, till then, happy coding.